going to get into a segment that we did, I believe, last year, at least once, maybe twice. But Brock already previewed it a little bit. I'm going to go through some different own percentages here to both give you guys an idea of who might be available in those ranges, kind of our top picks. And then we're going to battle it out, try to make a case for each guy. Brock will decide who he likes better. And the good news is, as a listener, you don't always have to agree with Brock. Hopefully you've taken that advice a long time ago. But come to your own conclusions. If both of these guys aren't available, hopefully at least one of them are in each little bucket here that we're gonna dive into. So Brock, why don't you take it away and get back to doing your thing.
Bucket number 1, 31% to 40% rostered. We will start with D.
All right. So I'm liking my odds here because I'm going with the show favorites, Sir John Jason Peterka, left wing, right wing, eligible for the Buffalo Sabres, just 34% owned, really dropped down of late, which I was excited to see because that means, one, he's going to be available in some of your leagues and means we get to talk about him here. So 7 goals, 7 assists, and 13 games prior to the Tage Thompson injury. Snapped a 6-game point drought with a goal last night against the Avs. He's been dominant at 5v5 with Thompson this season, creating over 36 scoring chances per 60. Problem is he's actually skating on the second line right now with Dylan Cousins, which is funny because that's what we wanted to see when Thompson was out of the lineup. And now that he's back, Peterka has finally been reunited with Cousins. So as you might imagine, production has not been as good away from Tage. His struggles during Thompson's injury certainly speaks to that, but he has had success with Cousins in the past. Talked last week, I believe it was, about how Cousins, Jack Quinn, and Peterka formed a really potent line in their rookie seasons a couple of years ago. So I think the production will be good enough to warrant a roster spot in the meantime while you wait for Peterka to inevitably be promoted once again to the top line. He's still on that first power play unit, playing 18.5 minutes a night on the season. Shot volume has been a little bit disappointing from what we were expecting. He was up around 3 shots a game last year in a lesser role. Hasn't even matched that yet, playing more minutes. But it was, again, much better when he was playing alongside Tage earlier in the season. It's a guy we were all very high on to start the year. I think this recent cold streak is a blessing because it means he's become available in more leagues. And it's a guy that I'm happy to keep buying in on. So the upside is just too good with Peterka, and I would certainly try to grab him while you still can.
Yeah, not to pump your boy up even more because I'm clearly trying to make a case against him. But we're all about, giving the fans what they want. And Peterka's already shown he can go on hot stretches. Earlier this year, was absolutely dominant before this cold stretch. So I'm with you, D. If you can get in on that before it gets hot again, he's in a perfect spot. And there is a reason that we love him on the DFO podcast. It's he does what we like. And speaking of that, I have to go with someone who's already been named on this podcast, and it is Anders Lee, captain out in New York. Currently 34% owned and trending upwards quite high. I really wanted to focus on this guy just because, as much as we pointed out his production to almost, I believe it was to Chuck earlier, he's really just been on an absolute tear in his last 16 games. 17 points for Lee, 8 goals, 9 assists, and 40 shots on goal during that time. While he's been just a point per game player and eating ice time, he also has been adding a ton of hits, as we saw by our stats earlier. He's got 40 on the year, so he's almost at a hit and a half per game, which is pretty good when you're adding a guy for goal production. He's on pace for over 250 shots on goal. We saw him put up a 40-goal season a little while ago, back in 2017-18, but it does show that he's got that type of production in him. Lee is on fire at the moment, and when we're talking about guys in this area, you kind of want to pick up the hot hand because most likely you might be dropping them soon anyways if they go cold or if another hot hand comes. So I like Lee at this point. I will admit, if I had to choose both, I would struggle between D and I if I was looking at them both on the waiver wire. But Anders Lee, it's great to talk about him again after last year's 37-point campaign kind of took him out of the fantasy spotlight. But one of the league's premium goal scorers, and he's doing it across all stats. So I really like him, and I think if he keeps this up, he'll be not talked about on this podcast because he'll be way too owned pretty soon. So hopefully that happens for both players. Brock, who do you like more?
Boy, this is tough. Judge Brock here. Difficult decision. I love both of these guys this year. Preseason, huge Peterka guy, obviously. Anders Lee has been a favorite of mine for the last month. I think I lean Peterka still, just because I think that he does provide a little bit more outside of the hits, right? Like I do think Anders Lee is still kind of a Chris Kreider type player where he's maybe a little one dimensional in terms of just the shot volume, and the goal scoring doesn't really provide much in the assist department, never really has. JJ Peterka, meanwhile, I mean, at the start of the season, 9 assists in 16 games. It's a 46 assist pace. You know, if he does see some more time with Tage Thompson moving forward, that power play gets going a little bit. I think Peterka is going to have a healthy number of assists, and the goal production obviously pretty solid as well. 16 points in 16 games. To be honest with you guys, I was trying to find a way to work Peterka into the would you rather segment, and I just couldn't find a great comparison because, like, seeing him at 34% just seems unfair to him after just 2 kind of bad weeks without Tage Thompson. And you have to imagine now more than ever, after being left off Team USA, Tage Thompson's gonna be pissed, and he's gonna be ready to rock here in the second half of the season. And a guy like Peterka, Alex Tuck, we've seen him play exceptionally well recently as well. So I think that entire Buffalo top 6 has probably got better days ahead. But yeah, would like to see Peterka with Tage a little bit more moving forward. But yeah, I'll give a slight edge to Peterka, although I do think this one is fairly close. Beebs, give us your guy between 30 and 21%.
So I will say that earlier section kind of robbed me a little bit. I kind of saw some of the names that I was going for, but that's okay because we're going to double up and we're going to make sure it's like a lecture in university. If you hear the name twice, maybe it's worth an ad. William Eklund out in San Jose, 25% owned at the moment, playing line 1 and power play 2, but that's power play 2 on a 50-50 split power play out there in San Jose. They tend to use both. I absolutely love Eklund. I have all year. As of late, though, he's really turned it on to another gear, and one that we came into the year excited about him for, and one that he's almost outperformed, in my opinion. He's got 14 points in his last 12 games played. During that time, he only has 20 shots on goal, which is a little alarming, and that's always been our issue with him all year. But if we're talking just points and assists, it's still okay because he is looking like he could be a point per game player. We kind of expect this lineup to have a bit of growing pains just with the young talent in it, and it seems like they're clicking quite well lately. Eklund's +7 in his last 12 games, so it just goes to show what he's been doing on both ends of the ice. He's not necessarily hurting San Jose defensively, and because of that, it's led to him getting 20-23 time on ice, which currently ranks 21st among all forwards in the NHL. He's actually averaging more ice time than Sidney Crosby, Sam Reinhart, Mark Scheifele, Barkov, Pasternak, the whole likes of him. So this is insane from a 22-year-old and someone who's proven he can actually take that load and work with it. He had 4 shots on goal last night. It's a good sign for what could come. He's had 10 shots in his last 4 games. I really like Eklund, and I think much like all the names we're going to name on here, it's one that's going to skyrocket in the next couple weeks as people kind of catch on to what's happening in San Jose. But again, the shots on goal are the biggest factor here that kind of keep me away. And now I'll have D suggest someone who does the exact opposite of that. So this should make things very tough for you, Brock.
Yeah, it feels a little cheap here. I'm going at the very top of the ownership range, but we can't go weak on this season's podcast and not talk about Pavel Dorofeyev. So he's going to get the spotlight a little bit more here. Left wing, right wing eligible, still just 30% owned. And really nothing's changed since we last talked about this guy. I'm sure he's probably rostered in your league and hopefully on your team if you play close enough attention to this podcast this season, but still out there in 70% of leagues. Once again, find himself on the top line with Eichel, as well as the top power play unit where he is one of their top shooting threats. The shot volume remains elite, but that kind of opportunity and shot production, he's going to remain productive all season long. He's got 12 goals in 26 games, shooting 15%. That's a 38-goal pace that looks to be very sustainable. And we say it all the time, right? But reliable goal scoring, it's the hardest thing to find in fantasy hockey, and Dorofeyev can provide that. Even the last 3 games where he's gone scoreless, still fired 9 shots on goal over that stretch. So that's about as long of a cold streak that you can expect to see with that kind of shot volume. He's deserving of a much higher own percentage. And again, you're just not going to find that type of goal scoring upside in this ownership range on the wire too often. So if you haven't yet, I would be sure to make room for Dorofeyev because I think he's going to be productive all season long.
I think the argument against Dorofeyev would be that Mark Stone looks like he's getting close to a return. And where does Dorofeyev slot into the lineup once Mark Stone is back, I think it's pretty safe to say that he's earned the right to continue to see top 6 minutes in some capacity. Right now Keegan Colasar is playing up in that top 6. I imagine he falls back into a fourth line role, and Dorofeyev ends up on Hurdle's wing at the very worst. And you look at what he did earlier in the season too. Still had 7 goals and 10 points in 13 games while Mark Stone was in the lineup. So I'm gonna side with D on this one again, strictly due to the shot volume. I think William Eklund is a very good player. I really like what we've seen from that Celebrini, Eklund, Zetterlund line recently, although I do believe that they're running a little hot. The underlying metrics suggest that it's not overly sustainable what they've done recently, but I mean, it's really good to see the young guns of the Sharks really start to heat up. We're not going to talk about them on today's show, but Beebs, you mentioned them earlier before we started the show. Will Smith seems to be coming into his own on a line with Mikael Granlund. Celebrini is an absolute dog. He's looked sensational lately. Zetterlund
Jake Wallman.
Yeah, Jake Wallman's been great. Like, this team is on a 3-game heater, and they've scored 14 goals in those 3 games. And if you go back even further, they've scored 24 goals in their last 5 games. It's been just an insane run for them, running probably a little bit hot. But yeah, like if they can sustain any level of potent offense, then yeah, I think both of these guys need to be picked up in a lot of leagues. And the amount we've talked about these guys and their production has not fallen off at all, yet the ownership is really not moved. It's kind of bizarre. I didn't think that we would see these guys where they were, and I didn't think we'd be talking about them in this segment. D, we'll go back to you here for the 20 to 11% bucket.
All right. So far, obviously, we've been shooting for upside here and, maybe a little bit of some sexier names. This is not a sexy name, not a ton of upside, but someone that I think if you're in trouble, you can throw on your roster right now in the short term, and he can really actually help you out. And it's probably being overlooked in a lot of leagues. And that's Pavel Zacha, center left wing, eligible, 17% owned. Point production on the whole of the season has been disappointing, maybe not all that surprising, but he's getting that exposure to Pasternak at 5v5, as well as on the top power play unit. The shot volume has been really strong of late. He's averaging 3 shots a game over his last 13 contests while playing 19 and a half minutes a night. He scored 5 goals and added 4 assists across that stretch. So again, it's not the highest upside that you're going to find. And it's, to be honest, tough to find really a lot of, maybe like point per game upside in this kind of ownership range. There are some interesting names out there, but I think if you got deeper rosters or you're dealing with some injuries and you're looking for a plug and play option in the short term, like I said, then I think Zacha is a solid bet to continue to produce at a respectable clip so long as he's seen this kind of usage and exposure. So I don't know. It's not my strongest argument because it's not like I wholeheartedly believe that this guy will be a must own for the rest of the season. But whether it be a stream or, like I said, if you're just in a pinch and you're looking to get some extra games in your lineup or you have a roster spot available, this guy's a really good bet to make right now because he's shooting the puck a lot and he's getting exposure to the few elite talents that the Bruins have left on their roster.
Yeah, the well starts to run dry as you get below 20%, as it should. And I think like anyone on Power Play 1 or a top 6 is really worth a look. And Zacha's for sure worth a look. I hate to go back to another name that I've mentioned in previous episodes, but due to some injury news today, I am going with Marco Rossi as my 17% owned player. Joel Eriksson, as mentioned today, announced out week to week. That means that there is 1906 time on ice that has to go around in the Minnesota lineup, and Marco Rossi's 1642 average this year can definitely take a little bit of a boost up. Rossi currently has 20 points in 25 games played to start this year. He is now on PP1, likely moving up to line 1, but if not, is still in the top 6 on line 2. Even if he averages a minute and a half more, as mentioned in our previous episode, he could become a point per game player. So while Joel Eriksson Ek is hurt, Marco Rossi's kind of going to become the guy down the middle for Minnesota. Unfortunately, it was injury season for them today. They had one tweet that announced 4 different huge injuries at the same time. But while that happens, we kind of gotta go after the guys who are going to feast and should perform. And I think Rossi's definitely one of those guys. I hate to beat the drum since obviously we were high on him on previous episodes, but the things that we were high on him and said he could get even higher for have happened exactly that. So Marco Rossi, 17%. This one, he's going to skyrocket up just strictly due to what's happening. So I'm glad I could catch him while he was in the 20 to 10% range, because I imagine in a day or two that will not be happening.
Yeah, you got him at the last minute there for sure. I'm going to side with Beebs on this one with Marco Rossi. I think that with Eriksson out, it's a pretty easy argument to make, in that especially if he is, most likely going to be the guy that lands on Kaprizov's center. We did see earlier in the season that it's, maybe not a foregone conclusion, right? We saw Matt Boldy shift back to center. I don't think that's a long-term solution for them, though. I do think that in the long run that it's going to be Rossi and Kaprizov. They might break up Kaprizov and Boldy again to try to balance that lineup out a little bit, but this is obviously just going to lead to a lot of minutes for Marco Rossi, who, as Beebs, you pointed out, has just been super, super good, right? Like he hasn't really had, any dry spells so far this season. Like it's been kind of pretty consistent production, 20 points in 24 games. And if you take a look at it, he's got what is that, like 7 or 8 games where he hasn't picked up a point. So he's got a point in 17 of 25 games. Pretty solid, pretty consistent production there. To your credit though, D, I think Zach has a pretty good dig up, pretty good find. That line's actually performed pretty well recently. 2.8 expected goals for per 60, 31 scoring chances, 13 high danger chances with Zaka, Geeky, and Pasternak. So they've been playing well. They play a ton. I don't mind Zaka if you missed the boat on Rossi. Just one other name I wouldn't mind throwing out there either. And I don't know how long this one's going to last. Probably similar to like D's, more of a stream right now. But Dylan Holloway has been really solid in 4 games under Jim Montgomery. He has 7 points, 4 goals, 3 assists, 14 shots on goal, averaging 1650 time on ice. He's literally doubled his output from the first 22 games of the season, while also playing over a minute and a half more than the first in his first 4 games under Montgomery. So there's really no avenue to like power play one time. I don't know exactly where he's going to slot into the lineup once Pavel Buchnevich comes back either. I would imagine that he's earned the right to remain in that top 6, similar to Pavel Dorofeyev, where it's probably more likely a guy like Brandon Saad drops down to the 3rd line. So I think that he's somebody that's worth keeping an eye on, worth picking up as a speculative ad right now to see how hot he can remain under Jim Montgomery, because sometimes under these coaching changes, new stars emerge. Pavel Zacha's looks pretty good after they switched to Joe Sacco. Dylan Holloway's looks pretty good since they switched to Jim Montgomery. So 2 decent names there to follow up if you missed the boat on Marco Rossi. Beeps, best player under 10% owned right now. Who you got?
Surprisingly, there was some options here, which is nice, because thank you to the community for not picking up guys they should. But Sean Couturier, a surprising 5% owned, is mine out in Philadelphia. Currently line 1, power play 1. He has 13 points in his last 17 games. He's shooting a lot. He's got 42 shots during those 72 games, and he's averaging 1950 time on ice during those 17 games. I dare you to find anyone in the 0 to 10% range that's averaging near 20 minutes on ice as a forward. And as we mentioned, when you're playing a lot, good things tend to happen. Couturier is another reason is strictly just between the names here. There's not really many that do touch power play 1. So I really like him at this spot. He's we've talked about it before with other players like Travis Konechny. Tortorella leans on certain players, and it seems lately Couturier might be his guy. And while he's hot, I would definitely like the idea of going after him. As mentioned, with these players that are so low owned, you're more just grabbing a guy while they are hot until the next hot hand steps up. And at that point, you just move on. So for now, Couturier is one of the hottest players while getting a ton of ice time and in a very good position there on power play 1 and line 1. So I like him a lot. I feel like I took the low hanging fruit here, so I do apologize. But D, who do you got at this very, very low owned percentage?
Yeah, I think whenever you're trying to sell, right, a big thing is knowing your audience. And I know Brock doesn't play in a ton of banger leagues, so this might be a bit of a tough sell. But I'm going to go back to the well here with my top banger league recommendation in Maxime Siplikov on Long Island, left wing, right wing eligible, just 6% owned, still skating with Brock Nelson and Kyle Palmieri on the Isles' second line. They've been a really strong unit at 5v5, averaging over 31 scoring chances and 3 expected goals per 60. He's also seen some time on the second power play unit. He's an older rookie. I believe he's 26 years old, coming off a really productive season in the KHL, where he really broke out for 31 goals in 65 games. So I think there could still be some untapped potential here in terms of his offense. But the major draw here is that he loves to throw the body around. He's up to 76 hits on the season, including 15 in his last 4 games. So I think he should continue to deliver reasonable raw production stats while helping you out immensely in the hits category. And it's just kind of bizarre to me that his own percentage is sitting as low as it is. I'm like, in these banger leagues, when you get a guy that can even just give you around half a point per game, if they're going to be giving you some elite hit totals, it's normally enough to drive the own percentage up, right? That's why we always see Tom Wilson up above 50% year after year. I think the name recognition just isn't there with Siplikov, understandably. So I'm going to keep bringing him up because he's an underrated gem in banger leagues, deserve to be at a much higher own percentage simply based off his value in those formats.
Judge Brock here doesn't have the best decision to make because I think that it's almost impossible to pick between these two. This is probably a cop-out. Like, yeah, if you're in a banger league, Siplikov is the obvious answer. If you need center help, Couturier is the obvious answer in deep formats. I don't really think that you could be like, yeah, one's better than the other because they both provide completely different skill sets. So probably a cop-out. I'm not really going to pick one because it's like, who cares, really? It depends what you're looking
Judge
for.
Brock.
Yeah, so you're both let out on bail on this one. Because, yeah, like I do think Couturier at 5%, I mean, he's playing 40 minutes a night. It's insane. And he's like the only guy that does – him and Konechny and Sanheimer, the only guys that don't end up in towards his doghouse. And then Siplikov, man, like – I've been talking about New York too, the Islanders' second line on my DFS show every time they play. I love them. Their underlying metrics are insane. And Palmieri, Nelson, and Siplikov should all have better offensive numbers. And I do think that over time it's probably going to happen.